Hey, welcome back to the Leadership Studio. Bob Sanborn here, and this is the fundraising edition. So for the whole semester, we'll be focusing on fundraising, and we're bringing some of the best fundraisers around to talk about their perceptions of fundraising, their history in fundraising, and hopefully it'll be able to give you some insight into resourcing the nonprofit organization. So today we start off with a bang. We have Ann Murphy with us. Ann, how are you doing?
Great.
Yes.
Looking forward to 2015.
Yeah, so you have a very rich history at the University of Houston downtown, where you're Director of Development, and now you're a consultant working in fundraising. So I'll ask you the first question. If you're writing a book, Ann, on fundraising, what are some of the chapters? What are some of the important elements around fundraising?
Well, you know, I think there are 6 pillars or 6 foundations that every fundraising, whether it's annual fundraising or plan giving or capital campaign, you have to have. So my chapters would start with that, with the first one being a culture of philanthropy. If an organization doesn't have a culture of philanthropy, it will stymie their fundraising ability. And what I mean by culture of philanthropy is really embracing the role that philanthropy plays in your organization, that your board and your staff embrace the fact that that is a part of what makes them a great organization. Then I would go have a whole chapter on case. What is your story? How do you really tell your story through a philanthropic lens? How do you talk about not needs, but how you're meeting needs? And so it's talking about that. Then I would have one on leadership. What does your leadership look like, both with volunteer leadership, with your board, with development volunteers? What does your staff leadership look like? What does your CEO? What's the role the CEO needs to play? Because as you know, Bob, the CEO is an important element when it comes to fundraising.
Most important fundraiser, right?
Absolutely. They are the chief fundraiser.
Yeah.
Then the professional staff. Do you have the right professional staff? Not only that it's not a job, I think when you look at your directors of development and directors of the annual fund, they've got to have a passion for the mission and really want to be there because they're out really being the ambassadors for that organization and the community. And then the last chapter would really be on the whole infrastructure, the systems, the policies, what you have in place. So I think in any fundraising, if you have those pillars and those foundational pieces, you'll be successful. So that would be my book.
Wow. And what are some mistakes that you see nonprofits make around fundraising? Maybe they're not following some of these pillars, but what are some of the obvious things that you see?
I think not being donor-centered. If we really stop thinking about the needs of our institution and think about the needs that our donors are trying to fulfill in their lives, you can be a lot more successful. I think back to what I said, it's not about having needs, it's about meeting needs. It's about solutions. So it's being able to really talk to your donors and saying, what do they value? What are they really looking for in fundraising? And trying to create those relationships. It's not an adversary. It's really that you need to be friends. And so how do you create those friends? I think the other biggest mistake they make is not realizing that close to 90% of all philanthropic dollars come from individuals. Yeah. And so it's really focusing on individuals. In fact, the most recent Giving USA numbers show that about 8% of giving comes from bequest, from estate giving. 5% comes from corporation, which what I say means dead people give more money than companies. Wow. So we've got to really quit focusing on thinking that the big companies in town are going to solve it, but really build those long-term relationships.
And one of the great things about individual giving is that by and large, when individuals are giving money, the economy is not affecting them as much. You know, we often say, well, with the coming recession, we're not going to get all that corporate money, but it has some impact, but less impact on individuals.
I think less impact on that top 5% of the net worth individuals. There was a scary stat that came out in the news the other day that said the top 1% of the population is $3 trillion, and they have more assets than I think the bottom 1/3. Yeah. And so again, I think it's focusing on those individuals with great wealth and really building those relationships. And it's not about going out and finding people with great wealth, it's looking at who's giving to you and realizing, do they have a greater wealth of building that relationship. So the recession, what we've certainly found at Dini Spheris is, what recessions do is it makes people very focused in their philanthropy. They are very focused on the values that they really care about and really give to that, and probably not as much frivolous type of, oh, I'll give to this, I'll give to that, but they focus in.
let's talk about your history, Ann. Now,
Okay.
I mean, where did you grow up?
I actually have lived 13 places, but I went to high school here in Houston, Texas at Robert E. Lee High School.
Wow, Lee High School. And then college, where'd you go?
Then college, I went to Stevens College, which is where I discovered the world of development, and I've done it ever since I was in college.
So Stevens College, a little college in Missouri.
Correct.
Don't they do a lot of equestrian stuff there at Stevens College?
They do, you know. Yes, it's a women's college. We're the oldest women's college west of the Mississippi.
Wow. And then from there, that's where you got involved in development?
That's where
Tell us about that.
I was a social work major. I was going to save the world, and I found out very quickly through those great things called internships that the world didn't want to be saved by Ann Murphy. So I ended up on a committee of the board of trustees of the university because no one else wanted to be on the development committee, and so I agreed to it and went to a meeting that planned a capital campaign and thought, I really like this.
Oh, wow.
And so I my senior year interned at the development office, and as I say, I've been doing development ever since.
And where did you go from there?
I decided very naively that I wanted to work at a women's college, so I sent a resume out to 30 women's colleges, and luckily Mary Baldwin College in Stanton, Virginia was looking for a director of the annual fund, and being
so that was your first job after college?
My first job.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then you made your way eventually to New York City?
I did, because I got a master's in fundraising management at the New School for Social Research is what the name of it was at that time. It's now the New School University.
Yeah.
Right, and actually it was one of the first master's programs in the country, and I think it was very beneficial. In fact, we all said we're not sure it got us jobs, but it certainly got us interviewed.
Yeah.
Because it's unique enough that I think people really want to talk to you.
And then how did you get back to Houston?
Well, I worked on a little campaign called the Statue of Liberty Ellis Island campaign. And since I was living in New York and they decided I had the right accent, they moved me back to Dallas, and I raised money in the Southwest for the Statue of Liberty, and then ended up back in Houston and went to work for the University of Houston Foundation.
Wow. And then you came to University of Houston downtown?
Then I went to work at the March of Dimes, and then I went to work at Dini. And I was, at that time, was Dini Partners.
Yeah.
And worked there for about 5 years, and University of Houston downtown was a client. And I fell in love with the mission. I fell in love with the president, the whole campus, everything. And I left Dini and was Chief Development Officer here for 5 years.
Wow, wow.
And then ended up back at Dini.
Back at Dini. And when you work with a lot of your clients, I mean, what is the thing that gives you the most joy as you work with your clients and as you focus on fundraising?
I think I really love working, I guess I would say the volunteers, but I love working with the staff too. But I think one of the joys of this business is we get to work with people that are doing this because they're passionate. And when you think of the big multi-million-dollar capital campaigns we do so much work with, the campaign volunteers are normally, they're great philanthropists because they've given, they're really passionate about what they're doing. And so getting to work with them, to have them feel comfortable in fundraising, having them realize it's not rocket scientists, it's really about building relationships, it's about listening, can be very rewarding in that sense. And then I get very excited about the things that organizations do once they raise the money, and being a little tiny part of transformation and working with organizations.
So this is the first of many lectures that the class will hear around fundraising. So the campaign may be a brand new idea to them. Talk a little bit about a campaign. Why does a nonprofit do a why does a nonprofit have a campaign? What happens during these campaigns?
Okay. Well, let me step back and say, when we think about development in any nonprofit, you can think about it as a three-legged stool. So you've got your annual that you do every single year, that's your program dollars, your operating dollars. A lot of people use the term unrestricted dollars. That's what you need to really operate the organization. So on an annual basis, you raise those dollars. Then there's the second is plan giving, and that's when you really are thinking about many times of people that have been long-term donors to you, to the annual fund, your loyal supporters, loyal board members, that you might ask them to consider making an estate gift. And many times those go into people's endowment, but many times they go to support programming. The third leg of that stool is what we call capital campaigns. And that's really when an organization has something that is broader and bigger than what you would do on an annual basis. Say you might want to build a building, or you may want to buy an MRI machine that's $5 million. Many times endowment will be a piece of what we call capital campaigns. And so it's really looking at the fact that you have some needs that hopefully were driven from your strategic plan that says, you know, we're the YMCA and we need to build a new branch. And so you come together, maybe a campaign of $1 million, $10 million. You know, the Museum of Fine Arts just announced their $330 million or $450 million campaign. That they're really looking at that piece. And so it's a finite need that you've identified as campaign objectives with a finite amount of time that you're trying to raise. Many times you should go back to those people that are supporting you on an annual basis, and they make those larger gifts that many times are paid out over multiple of years, a lot of times naming opportunities. So so a campaign, a capital campaign, really is, again, looking at funding some strategic needs outside of your operating.
When you look at the big picture of groups that do campaigns, a lot of times you hear the big campaigns, but little organizations do campaigns, but you don't hear about failures. And you and I know that there are failures within those campaigns. Is it just that the word doesn't get out? Is that sort of what happens?
You know, I think failure on campaigns is, if you go back to those pillars I talked about at the first. Do you really have a strong case that's based on a strategic plan? Can you really state that there is a community need that you can validate, that you have enough people that know of you, support you, share the values of what your organization's doing, that they then agree the fact that this is meeting a great community need? And do you have the volunteers that are willing to roll up their sleeves and really make that happen? I've worked on campaigns that I would have given 50-50 chance that they could raise the amount of money they said they wanted to raise, but because there's been one or two volunteers that have absolutely said, this is my priority, I'm going to make this happen, they've been successful. And then I've seen others that you think they have a very strong case, but they haven't really grown a donor base. They don't have those people that are already supporting them. Because many times people are not going to make their first gift to you is not going to be a 5 or 6 or 7 figure capital gift. People want to give some gifts to you, see how you spend those money, get to know you through that annual fund, through those annual operating dollars. That's the reason I think it's important before you launch a capital campaign many times is to have at least a base of some annual donors that know you and love you and want to then raise their gift to you.
How important is that volunteer committee, the campaign committee, you know, people from your board and others? How important is that to the success of that campaign?
I think very important. Now, have I seen some campaigns that have not had strong volunteers? Yes. I will tell you what happens, though. It means that you better have a really strong CEO who's willing to go out and really ask for those dollars, a strong chief development officer, and it normally takes longer. Just to build those relationships, you're probably going to need more prospects. Some of the gifts may not come in at a high level as they might have come in otherwise. But you can do it, but it is harder.
When you look around Houston and you look at some of the major nonprofit organizations in Houston, which are the ones that you think and you look, now that's an example of fundraising at its best. They know what they're doing, they have a machine, they have the leadership, and they're doing almost everything right. Which groups are doing that sort of thing?
Besides all my clients?
Yeah, all your clients, of course.
All my clients, of course. You know, I think when you look at MD Anderson, MD Anderson Hospital, Cancer Center, absolutely, when you think about the way they're very donor-centered, when they bring on development staff, they spend a week, sometimes 2 weeks, an orientation of really learning that hospital, learning about cancer, learning about the biology behind it, before they're ever allowed to go out and talk to a prospect. That they have major gift officers that have a prospect pool that they're working with, that they're assigned, and they really spend long-term building those relationships. They bring in that development council, which are made up of some of the strongest volunteers across the country, predominantly Texas, but very strong, that they bring in at the right time. They also know the right time to bring in a volunteer to help with that ask, when the right time to bring in the CEO or the chief development officer. So when you think about a machine and the number of people they have, that's a really great office. I think one of the other ones that I would say is the Houston Grand Opera. Again, I think Greg Robertson heads up that development over there, and I think he's one of the better development people in town.
He'll be in the class speaking as well.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
You've got to get him to talk about major gifts and how he's so donor-centered and always thinking about the donor, and I think that's what makes that.
He's very good also about talking about the passion of opera.
Right.
You know, and even if you've not seen opera, you sort of fall in love with opera just by talking to Greg.
Right.
It's sort
And
of
he loves opera.
Yeah, he
I
does.
remember when he talked about taking that job, and I said, not often in our lives can we work
Right.
at something that we're that passionate about.
Yeah. But you see other organizations that people naturally think are good fundraising groups that don't do as well. And there was a while when the Houston Symphony did not do as well as people would imagine. And we see other organizations like that. What happens when you see something that you and I would probably guess, oh, they probably have a good machine, but they're not doing the job necessary?
Again, I think it's not having your strategic plan and an organization that's driving the true program or operational plan. And from those two pieces, that's what the development plan has to come. That you really need a development plan that's helping you drive that ongoing annual operating plan, and also is helping you drive towards that strategic plan. That if you don't have those three pieces where they're really in concert with each other, I think organizations are weak because of that. Mm-hmm. The other piece I find is that when a development plan is put together, it's not really driven by analytics of really looking at saying, this is what we raised last year, here are the prospects we have, here are what we think those prospects will do next year, what are the volunteers that we have, that you're really basing it on your past performance and really analyzing that many times development operations say, we've got a $2 million hole that needs to be raised, go raise $2 million, but it's not really based on the strength of what they've done in the past. And if you need to say, raise 20% more than you raised last year, then you're probably going to need more staff or more resources. Mm-hmm. Don't just think that they can raise 20% more than last year with the same resources.
Let's talk about specific aspects within fundraising and talk about myths around those and how important, because if we were to grab the whole class together today and we talk about fundraising, a few of them would say, well, this is important and this is important. Let's talk about some of those important and visible members of the Houston community on your board. How important is that?
I think it is important, but only if they're committed. Mm-hmm. I think having a board made up of what I call resume stuffers doesn't do you any good. Mm-hmm. And so I also think there are a handful of people in this town, and I will not name them, but there are a handful of people that you see are on 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 boards. Yeah. No one can be committed and really be helpful if they're on 10 different boards. So I think it's also, I think when you're thinking about your board of directors, there are those 50 names that we all recognize. Well, you know, there's a whole tier of probably a couple hundred, if not a couple thousand, underneath those typical 50 names that probably have almost the same access, almost the same ability to help you fundraise. So I think you're better off of trying to find people that are passionate about what you're doing and willing to really help you versus just having a name that will do it. But I think the piece is really spending the time of analyzing what do we need from our board. Mm-hmm. Do we need somebody that can help us with energy? Do we need somebody that can help us with law? If we're doing a lot of things with the city, do we need somebody that's got access to the city? What kind of ethnic communities do your board need to be able to have access into and represent? So it's sitting down and saying, as we look over the next 3 to 5 years, and we know where the organization's going, mm-hmm. what are the skill sets and the access that we need from our board? Sitting down and then saying, okay, if we need somebody that has access into some of the top law firms in town, sitting down and then saying, let's come up with the 3 names that we feel like are the best 3 names, mm-hmm. and going out and really sitting down and having that discussion with them. Well, first of all, look at the names and then seeing if they're donors, which is even better yet, is to look at your donor pool. But sitting down and saying to them, you know, Bob, we want you to come on our board because this is what we need you to do, to make sure that you really sit down and say, this is the role we need you to play. Yes, there's the standard roles we need everybody to play on a board, but here's what we're really looking at for you. Because many times we ask people to be on the board, but we really haven't told them why. Yeah. And there may be someone who said, I'm not going to access other law firms. That's not what I'm comfortable doing, or I'm not going to do this. And so I think it's being very clear with someone what role you want them to play. And number one on that sheet should be that, that a board member to board member needs to say this when they're being recruited. Our expectation of each other as board members is that we all give at the level in which we're capable of giving, and we're one of your top 2 to 3 philanthropic priorities as long as you're on the board. It's not that that there's an obligation to do that, that a board member says this is what we expect of each other, and it's a little bit of a different tone. But I think you have to be upfront with someone that everyone needs to give and why that's important, and then 4 or 5 bullet things of saying this is the role we want you to play on the board. And people don't. They're just not clear, and then they're really surprised. They get somebody on the board, they said, oh, well, you know, I travel all the time. I didn't know the meetings were going to be the first Wednesday. I'm never in town. And you didn't have that discussion.
I think what's also interesting about that is you're asking a board member, and this is why you want them. Board members respond to why you want them and that you want them for these specific reasons.
Right.
It's almost a better ask in many ways, right? Instead of we'd love for you to be a member, join the Children at Risk Board, it's you're telling them that you really need them for these reasons.
Right.
And
join the Children at Risk Board, it's not going to take much time.
Right.
A killer. And then you're surprised when they don't give much time, but you told me it wasn't going to take much time.
Exactly.
You'd never do that.
No, of course not. I've probably made all the mistakes, though, at some point. It's just, how about the idea of having public officials on your board? We hear this sometimes. Oh, I'm going to have a very visible public official, a politician on our board. What's your thoughts on that?
I think if it makes sense for your organization, and again, going back to saying over the next 3 to 5 years, here's what we're trying to accomplish. Do we need that public official on our board? Now, I think, again, in this very split world we're in, if it's a Republican or a Democrat, you're going to make part of the world unhappy in that respect. I think if you're really looking from a board that can help you access and raise dollars, I'm not sure I'd put judges because they really can't go out and raise those dollars, so I think you have to be careful with that. I think many times there's a place perhaps to have an advisory board that you might put those kinds of individuals, those politicians or judges or some of that not necessarily on your board. But again, no 2 organizations are absolutely exact of what they need from their board. There are very much institutional boards that meet 3 or 4 times a year that are at a very high level, like a Rice University board, versus a small social service agency who may meet monthly and really needs more hands-on work. Yeah. So they're just 2 different kinds of boards.
I've had board members say when you put politicians on your board, all they do is they ask other board members for money for their own campaigns. So,
well, maybe if you don't want that to happen, when you ask them, you could say that's...
But don't ask me. Yeah, that's right. Talk a little bit about, we mentioned very briefly, corporate giving. So there's this whole idea that if we could just get some money from ExxonMobil or from Shell, we're all set. So talk a little bit about corporate giving and some of the myths there.
Absolutely. As I said earlier, it's about 5% of giving, which last year was about $335 billion with a B. $335 billion is given, and about 5% from corporations. So out of your 100 cents on every dollar, 5 cents of that comes from corporations. And I think you have to look at corporations. They did not go into business to give money away. When you look at the Exxons and Shells and JP Morgan Chases, they have to respond to stockholders. So they have to truly justify why they're spending these dollars. So when you think about the fact that they have to justify when they're spending it, they have to be able to show that it's good for their bottom line, which how does it good for the bottom line of a company? They're making the communities in which they do business in stronger. They're getting their public appeal, that their name is out there being shown as good public citizens. And so when we think about going to a corporation, can your organization, one, publicize them in a way that makes them be seen as good community citizens? And 2, are you helping their bottom line? What are you doing that's really making the community better that they work at? Look at the Chevron race, the marathon that we just had. Great PR. We all talk about the Chevron race. It was on everybody's T-shirts. It was on all the publicity. That's marketing dollars for wanting you to think about going to Chevron and buying gas. And so, again, those marketing that many times, maybe it's not going for the philanthropic dollars, it's going for the marketing dollars. And as we all know, the marketing dollars are normally a little larger than the philanthropic dollars. So again, if you can go after marketing dollars, don't think of just the philanthropic dollars. And I think being able to, again, access at the highest level at those companies can make a difference. So, yes, you can go up the chain of the community relations or the corporate giving person, but that's a much harder road to go up. But again, your organization's got to show that you're going to make their bottom line stronger.
One of the best ways that people do a lot of fundraising in Houston is they focus on foundations. So we think about the Brown Foundation, the Houston Endowment, the Arnold Foundation. Is that a strategy that every nonprofit in Houston and Texas should have?
Well, you know, again, back to the $335 billion that was given, about 15% of that was foundations. And so we're very fortunate, I think, in Texas and particularly Houston. We have a tremendous amount of foundations. And so I don't know what the people in Nebraska are doing, to tell you the truth, because they don't have as many foundations as we do, but I think we do in Houston. We also have...
And then in Nebraska, Buffett gave all his money to the Gates Foundation, so they might have had money, but now it's in Gates,
Absolutely. You know, I think foundations, again, are a good source of dollars. Now, it's not, again, it's not your be-all, end-all. And so it's really looking at tying into what that foundation's trying to accomplish. And of all the groups of individuals, foundations, or corporations, foundations are the one that there's the most information that any grant officer, any chief development officer should absolutely do their research before they go in. There's absolutely no reason to go in and have nothing about what that foundation. They have to do 990s. You can find out every gift that they make. You can find out who their trustees are, how much they're giving away. All of that can be very much accessed. The foundation directory, if you don't do the subscription, the public library has it, and so there's no excuse for not really researching. And so I would say on the foundation, it's researching and finding maybe those top 10 or 20 that have shown through their past giving they give to like organizations or what you're trying to accomplish. And then it's finding out those that actually have someone on staff that you can talk to. Best case have been sitting down and trying to get an appointment with that with the grant officer or the head of the foundation, and going in and saying, here's what we're trying to accomplish. Tell us if that is still in your wheelhouse or what you're trying to give. How should we best approach you? Is there a dollar level that you think we should do? You should have a sense of what that is before you go in, but you really want to go in and start building that relationship and asking if things have changed. If there is no staff person, that's when you look at the trustees and you share the names of those trustees with your board of directors or your development committee and see if anybody has access into those. Sending in cold proposals to foundations that you've built no relationship with is a really hard road to raise money. It's going to be a really
very time consuming.
Very time consuming and very low on success. Again, people give to people, even foundations. They give to where they know somebody, because you can write a proposal. I've always said you could write a proposal that solves world peace, hunger, and education with the greatest proposal. And if you don't know somebody at that foundation, it may not even be read.
That's right.
Yeah, and so I think the misconception on foundations is everybody spends all the time writing the perfect proposal and they haven't spent any time building the relationship. Now, you have to have a well-written foundation proposal. Certainly can't have mistakes in it, misspelling, bad grammar. But you've got 80% of your time should be on spending building that relationship with those donors.
And it's interesting, that relationship will almost inform you always, almost always, if or not you're going to get the money and whether it's worth it or not to even apply. It's sort of interesting, right? When you've done this a while, you know when you're going to get money by and large.
Right.
You may not know exactly how much.
Right. You know, and we're really fortunate. When you look at Houston Endowment, which gives away $60–70 million a year, they've got an entire grant staff, program officers that are there to help you. One of the foundations in the city of Houston that's the most successful, I would say, is the Houston Endowment. Pick up the phone and call them. Go meet with that grant officer. Don't ever send a proposal into them that you really haven't set. And then you get to foundations that don't have any grant officers, and that's where the relationship with your board and the relationship with the trustees makes a difference.
Yeah. All across Houston, we often see the big galas that are happening, and the Houston Chronicle is quick to say, $3 million was raised, $750,000 was raised. to an entry-level fundraiser, they may say, that's the way to go. We need to have a big gala because we could raise $750,000. Is that the way to go, Ann?
No.
How did I know I was setting you up for that?
You know, I think there is a place for special events. I think when we do see these $2 million, you know, the Houston Grand Opera $2 million and the Museum of Fine Arts $2 million on their gala, those didn't happen overnight. Those certainly didn't happen the first time they were out of the box and doing that. But also I think the key piece of that is who's chairing it, who's on their board. Because if you look at chairs of significant galas in this town, they will tell you it takes them 2 to 3 years payback, buying tables at all their friends' galas that bought tables at their galas. So you've got to find the right volunteer leadership that has the access into the community that will buy tables. The other piece is that your fundraising, when it comes to any kind of special event, you're going to make your money on the underwriters and the tables. You do not make the money on ticket sales.
Tickets, yeah.
And so it's really focusing on who's going to buy these tables and underwrite. On the flip side of that, there are people that that's the way they like to give philanthropy. That's the way they really like to give. And so if you don't do any special events, you really are missing out on that there are individuals that'll do a $25,000 table that won't give you a $25,000 unrestricted gift for your operating. And so it's knowing your donor pool, it's knowing who your prospects are, who your volunteers are, to say, do we have that right mix to be able to do a big ticket gala? Now, there are a lot of special events that aren't necessarily the big ticket galas, and I think those are getting competitive, and I think when you look at those giant arts organizations, they can, in essence, get away with doing over-the-top centerpieces, over-the-top wine, incredible food, because they're arts. If you're a social service agency, that can backfire on you. I know for a fact there was a social service agency, it's been 20 years ago, that had a gala chair that got the most incredible over-the-top invitation done, totally underwritten. A company printed it for her. She sent it out, and total backlash because people said, if you're spending that kind of money on the invitation, we're not going to support you. So you have to look at that again through the lens of what your organization really is doing. Now, I think there's also luncheons, which are a lot less expensive of doing that.
And can make a lot of money.
And can make a lot of money. And in all fairness, I'm chairing the Girl Scouts of San Jacinto Council luncheon this year. So as much as I say no to fundraisers, I think there is a place for that. But, you know, when we sat down to do that gala, we really looked at finding someone, not just to honor anyone, but we found someone that had a connection to the Girl Scouts, that Girl Scouts meant something to them, because I think that resonates with people of really doing that. Or having a really incredible speaker that people want to come hear, or making it a networking, or come up with something more, you know, a breakfast, something more creative that you're really doing.
And there's some things that are relatively, a breakfast being one of them, relatively inexpensive to put on. So you're still doing a lot of planning, you're still spending a lot of time planning and getting the invitation list, but maybe a little less expensive. But I want to use that as a segue though, because all the time that's spent planning a special event, if we put it into individual giving, I mean, is that sort of the holy grail of fundraising? It's all about getting a sort of core group of individuals to support you?
I think most nonprofits, development shops do not spend enough time on individuals. I think one of the things of thinking about a special event is, are you able through that special event to introduce people to your organization that you might not have ever had been able to have introduced to you because of who buys a table? But the problem is, what are we doing after that special event to follow up with people that were there that you introduced them for the first time? You know, long speeches no one wants to listen to at galas and luncheons, period. But how are we using that special event to grow our base of perhaps people that are going to support us individually? Or how do you have people that are supporting you with a $500 check for a program you're doing that year, and they may buy a ticket to your event on top of that? We have a tendency many times in fundraising, once someone's given to you once in a year, we don't think about resoliciting it. Now, I don't think you should solicit everybody every month, but I do think it's a lot of times you think, how can we have people think about wanting to support us more than once? But also thinking about really utilizing those special events to grow your prospect pool. But you're right, it is about individuals. It's really about And it's also analyzing who are the individuals that are giving at your top levels and making sure that you're cultivating and stewarding those at a higher level. Many times we'll go into an organization, they have a stewardship plan that's one size fits all. Yet if you analyze their donor pool, probably 70% of their annual fund is coming from about 20% of their donors. So what are you doing with those 20% to grow those gifts?
Mm-hmm. Well, let's go to the Twitterverse and see what people are tweeting about in regards to questions for you.
Never been on the Twitterverse.
You've never been on the Twitterverse?
No.
Yeah, you got to do it. So Frida wants to know, this is interesting. So what is it that makes a fundraising campaign stand out when there are several agencies competing for the same funding?
I think it goes back to your case for support. Mm-hmm. How do you tell your story? How do you explain to people the need you're meeting in the community? Again, it's not about having needs, it's about meeting needs. So I think it's being able to really very clearly be able to say, here's the need, here's the solution, and here's why we're the right institution to do this, because this is our history. And the other is, I think, having every single one of your board members learn their mission speech. Talk about elevator speech. Every board member needs to be able to, in 30 to 45 seconds, quickly, sharply, be able to grab someone about the mission of your organization.
That was Frida Clark, if I didn't mention that. Jennifer Tomasic wants to ask, do you see any correlation with the size of a nonprofit and the fundraising capabilities? That's an interesting question.
Yes, to a certain extent, because again, if you're talking with people about the needs you're meeting, and on an annual basis, let's say you're raising $1 million on an annual basis to meet your programs, it would be highly unusual, and in 35 years of doing this, I've never seen it, that someone would give you $1 million. I mean, if that's your total fundraising goal for the year.
Right.
But where we're probably missing out is if someone has the capability of giving, are you being able to talk to them about an estate gift? Are you really thinking about what could we do with that $1 million? Many times organizations don't think big enough. One of the exercises I do many times with CEOs is to be able to say, if someone walked in your office and said, I want to give you $250,000 or $1 million, and pick the number, can you clearly state something that's transformational that you could really say, our strategic plan, something we'd really love to do that we don't have the funds for? But many times we think
I think you asked me that one time, and I fumbled around a little bit, right?
Yeah.
People fumble around on that question.
Right. And it's not about what you're doing tomorrow in operational. It's to think transformational.
Yeah.
And so we don't think transformational. But, an organization with a $2 million operating budget and an organization with a $200 million operating budget are never going to raise the same. I mean, it just...
But we see some sort of overperformers, right? I mean, Small Steps Nurturing Center, a couple others. There's some small places that seem to raise a lot more money than would be expected.
Yes.
Yeah, which
and
is
again,
sort of
I think
interesting.
I also think that there are times that there are opportunities when an issue is hot. Yeah. And so when you're a hot issue, that can happen. I did a little campaign in Fort Bend County for an organization. It was a $3 million campaign. And so I will tell you, we got a $1.5 million gift on that campaign, which is highly unusual to get a gift. But again, they understood the need out there.
We find that some of our human trafficking stuff, because it's hot, right, gets a little bit extra attention. Esmeralda Jimenez wanted to know, what are your tips in turning a conversation when you're soliciting a major gift from someone? Is there a turn in that conversation, or is it just an ongoing relationship?
I do think it's an ongoing relationship, and I tell people that I think the number one skill in raising major gifts is listening. And so hopefully you're not sitting down with someone the very first time you've met them and not had a conversation with them to ask for a major gift, because that's a no-no. But you should have listened and had what I call discovery conversations with individuals to really uncover what they value. Because if you can understand what someone values, you will know what to ask them for. And so it's having that conversation. If someone's been a long-term donor to you, being able to say, can you talk to me about the very first gift you ever made to our organization, and what have we been doing right that you've continued to give us for 10 years? What are we doing that inspires you? To have a conversation to think, as we look at our strategic plan and all the areas that we're trying to accomplish, what one of those really is of your passion? Having those kinds of conversations prior to ever coming in and asking for a gift, and then being able to go in and say, you know, Bob, one of the things you really talked about was human trafficking is such not only a social issue, but an economic issue. And so we really together, through this gift, could really accomplish that. So will you join with us to help accomplish this? So it's again about the benefit, not the features, but the benefits, and having an understanding already that they believe in that program before you ever ask.
And you have so much knowledge of this, right? You've had so much experience. It's incredible.
It's all I've ever done. Deep but narrow.
Liz Earhart has a great question about, you know, what are your favorite ways to acknowledge donors and volunteers? Stewardship. What are your favorite ways to do that stewardship, or some interesting things that you've seen?
And you know, stewardship is so important, and it's one of my favorite topics of really looking about stewardship. And I think my favorite stewardship is when you really are being very donor-centered about it. Most people who make gifts don't want another tchotchke. I mean, if someone has made a significant gift to you, giving them a plaque or giving them a coffee cup or giving them whatever, it's typically not what they want to do. I think the more personalized you can make it to what the mission of the organization is, the better you are. I think the best stewardship is a personally handwritten note. We've lost the art of handwritten notes.
Yeah.
And I think it's not just from the Chief Development Officer, but I think many times having the CEO write a note and then going to your board meetings, at every board meeting, taking the list in of who's supported you in the past, asking board members to quickly write some notes, and then you take them, you address them, you stamp them, you mail them, because I think they want to do it, but by the time you find a stamp and an envelope and the address, but many times I think that personalized note from a board member can have a very big impact. Years ago, when I was at the March of Dimes, we had a great volunteer by the name of Jeff Love, Ben Love's son.
Oh, sure.
Great volunteer.
One of the best networkers that I know.
Yes, and he can remember details. Well, he helped us get a gift from Houston Endowment, and this was in the old days when you could do it in a week. Anyway, he helped us get a gift from Howard Creekmore. He helped us get the biggest gift that March of Dimes had ever gotten. So this is how long ago it was. We faxed to all the board members that he had done this and asked him to drop him a note or whatever. He came to the next board meeting with the notes that he'd been given, thanking him for helping us get that gift. And he became a long-term volunteer of that organization because he said, I'd never been thanked for helping an organization raise money before like we did.
Wow, very nice.
So I think it gives that person, I mean, what could you have done for Jeff Love? I mean, there wasn't, a knick-knack wasn't going to be it. But all the personal letters, and if people who know him know he has quite the vocabulary. And there were a couple board members that went out of their ways to use words that none of us had ever heard of, and he really appreciated them.
Oh, that's
so I think it's that personalized, really thinking about what's important to that person.
Yeah.
And giving, and that's the reason I think Greg Robertson's such a good fundraiser, is because that's exactly what he does.
Yeah, he's really good. Delicia Blanton wanted to know, relationships with donors are very important. And how do you keep relationships with these donors ongoing? You know, how do you keep, I mean, how often do you recommend visiting with someone who's a regular donor?
I think you've got to pick up the signals from them. I mean, there are some people that want to visit with you once a year, or they just want to be updated quarterly through a letter. And so I don't think there's any absolute what's the right number. I think most people don't visit with people enough, but I think it's really being bold enough to be able to say, you know, Bob, you're one of our really loyal supporters, and I really want to continue to keep you informed. What's the best way to do that? Would you like us to send you quarterly newsletters? Would you like our CEO to call you? Would you like to, and ask them how they want to be kept informed, and then build those customized plans that really fit with that donor.
What do you do, Ann? Because you and I have both seen people like this that say, oh, you don't need to do anything. I'm fine. You know, I'll continue to give. I don't really need anything from you. What do you do for that? Because there are those guys, right? And part of it is that's just what they say. They may not even mean it, but that's what they're telling you.
I'll be able to say, you know, I understand that and I appreciate that. Would a quarterly one-page update be too much to send to you? Because we'd love to at least just do that. And we do it for a handful of people. So it isn't something we're customizing for you, but there's about 30 of our really loyal individuals that we like to quarterly. Would that be infringing? Can I do that? And normally they'll say
yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Especially if you say we're doing it for 25 or 30 other people. It's not like you're doing it just for them. Because I think people's greatest fear is that you truly don't want to steward them. This is just a hoax, because when you're going to come back and ask me for again. People don't believe that it's true stewardship. It's just a way to come back and ask me for again.
Jason Covington has a great question. And this is something that comes up with a lot of board members that are new to the whole idea of fundraising. He's basically asking about, do you guarantee any particular result? And you sometimes hear from board members like, well, can we work it so they just get a percentage of the money that they help us raise? Talk about that in regards to being a nonprofit fundraising consultant.
Okay, and I was just asked this question a week ago in presenting to an organization.
It's a typical board question here in Texas, I find.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, we are members of the Association of Fundraising Professionals. Also, Dini Spheris is a member of the Giving Institute, which is made up of about 50 of the top fundraising consulting firms across the country. Both of those organizations, it's against policy to do that. So because we follow their policy and ethical guidelines, and AFP, no fundraiser who's a member of AFP can accept a percentage raised. And it is different because many times in for-profit, that's exactly how it's being done. So I understand when board members ask that. And I think part of it is going back to, I think part of that answer is that fundraising is a team sport. And so no one person absolutely says, I made that happen. Do I write the perfect foundation proposal grant to the Fondren Foundation and I get credit, or is it the fact that our board chair grew up and went to boarding school with David Underwood? Which do you think had more weight, my proposal or the fact that he's known David Underwood?
I think the David Underwood thing.
Right. So there's a little bit of piece of that. But also in the sense of people want to feel like they're supporting the mission of the organization. And if they feel like 10% is coming off the top, am I really supporting the mission of the organization?
Yeah.
And also there is no guarantee. No one should ever absolutely guarantee that they can raise the dollars. So when we price, we come in and say, here's the work that we're going to do, here's the time it's going to take, here's the value we're adding to your organization, and that's going to be a fee, and we charge it on a monthly basis. I don't know of any legit fundraisers that do it any other way.
Spencer Lightsey wanted to understand about Dini Spheris and how do you, the most important factor, Dini Spheris says, the most important factor in giving is consumer confidence. How do you succeed if consumer confidence is low? Talk a little bit about consumer confidence in giving.
Consumer confidence as in the economy consumer, or consumer confidence in the organization?
In the organization, I would guess, yeah.
Because I think in the organization, again, you have to prove that what you say is true. And so many times if there has been some statements or in the press that haven't been as flattering to you, I think it's being able many times to go outside to well-respected organizations or individuals who can do testimonials. I mean, I think facts speak highly of being able to say we served X number of people and here was the outcome, and be very clear. I think when you talk to some people, they give through very much facts and figures. There are other people that give through their heart and passion. So I think it's really knowing how to tell your story both through the facts, but also through the heart and head of that passion piece. But you're absolutely right. If people don't have confidence that you can do what you say you're going to do, it takes a long time. You know, years ago, there were some scandals at some national organizations, and it took them years to come over that. Years.
United Way, right? Was
United Way and American Red Cross, long time.
Yeah,
so.
Whitney Emanuel has a question about how different is fundraising locally rather than nationally?
You know, most fundraising is local. People really give where it's impacting in their backyard. And so I think when we talk about national fundraising, again, I worked on the Statue of Liberty Ellis Island campaign, and we still tried to bring it back to why it was important in Texas, why it was important in Kansas, how many people, immigrants probably came through the Ellis Island. And so we did do that. But it was interesting, when I did that campaign, there were most foundations in Texas would not support the Statue of Liberty Ellis Island campaign because it was in New York, and the foundations didn't support things outside the state. So again, I think most fundraising is local. Now, you may be an organization that's a national organization, but again, you've got to be able to show how you're impacting someone in their own backyard.
Dini Corazon wants to know, what advice do you give someone who's first entering fundraising? So a brand new development person, do you have a piece of advice for them?
I think try to find a handful of mentors. Try to find some people that have been in the business 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, and really stay in touch with them and get them advice on what you're doing. I think taking classes like here at UH downtown, getting that education, even through United Way has courses, AFP have courses. I think getting the education is important, but also I think it's any new fundraiser, go out and ask for money. Whether it's $100 or $100,000, it's some of the same skills. And there are many directors of development who've never sat down face-to-face and asked someone for a gift. So if you are in a nonprofit that your job doesn't require that, ask for a small portfolio of can you have some individuals that you can go call on face-to-face and ask for a gift, or go on a board of directors and say, I want to come on the board because I want to help you raise money. So I think the best advice is to actually get out and ask for money, and many people don't do it.
Yeah. John Holland wanted to know, his question was, how do you overcome the fear of asking people for money, right? So very similar to that. He also wanted to know, if your organization does not have an endowment, how would you suggest building one from scratch?
First of all, you better have a strategic plan that says why you need that endowment. To simply say, we want an endowment because everybody else has an endowment, it's kind of like these institutions that kick off billion-dollar campaigns because somebody else had a billion-dollar campaign. I think it's being able to say, our strategic plan drives us to do X, and through an endowment, we're going to be able to help accomplish that, putting that together. And again, typically people who give endowment gifts have been people that have been supporting you on an annual basis, typically going to be individuals. Corporations don't give endowment gifts. Many foundations, now there are a handful that do some endowment gifts, but they are an endowment. So they feel like many times they're getting better rates of return than you are, so why should I give you that money? But it's looking for that core individuals that will give those endowments. It's looking at really talking to people about estate gifts. I think some of the stronger nonprofits have a policy in place that when they get an unrestricted estate gift, that it's designated to absolutely go into an endowment, that there isn't any other way that it can go. And so I think that really makes for a stronger organization. And that's my phone.
Is that your phone?
Yes, I thought I put it on mute, and I obviously didn't.
Let me ask you one last question then. Brittany Kilgore wants to know, you probably have a favorite client. What makes someone, as a consultant, a fundraising consultant, what makes an organization your favorite client?
Two things. One, when I'm really passionate about their mission, and luckily I've been able to, at Dini Spheris, really work with organizations I'm passionate about. I think the second is when they really look at it as a partnership. When we're part of the team. I start using the word we a whole lot when I work with organizations. I really feel like I'm part of that team. And so again, we don't have all the answers, they don't have all the answers, but together we do have all the answers. And so realizing that information is just going to make us stronger, and that we're there just to make you look better and the organization to be transformed, but we need to do it as a partnership.
So a couple of quick questions as we finish up. One question I wanted to ask is, and it's still development related, entry-level development salaries, what are we talking about in general for people coming out maybe with no experience or a little bit of experience, a master's? What's an entry-level development salary?
You know, and that is so broad because
it's tough answer.
And I will tell you the salaries are higher in Houston than some other cities because of the Texas Medical Center. Medical Center typically has higher salaries in development, and so it really has, I think, raised all boats when it comes to salaries. But you know, I've seen very small not-for-profits pay $25,000, and I've seen other entry-level positions be $50,000 to $60,000, and so it can be that broad. The other is depending on what you're going to do. Special events people typically are paid at a fairly low level of that. Grant writers, the people that are writing the grants, are kind of nixed on that. Direct the annual fund will put you at a little higher level. People that have experience asking for dollars, people that have had major gift experience, whether that's a $5,000 or a $50,000, can again command a little higher salary. But I see development salaries anywhere from the 20,000s to, surprising enough, you will know that there are some development people in this town, and again, I think most of them in the healthcare, that are above 500,000.
Your favorite restaurant in Houston, Ann?
Oh, I'm such a foodie. It would have to depend on what I'm going to eat. I like the Glass Wall.
Oh, that's a good place, yeah.
Now, one of my favorite Mexican restaurants, Tequila's, just closed.
Oh, that's too bad. I feel bad for you.
Anyway, it was...
And there's so few other Mexican restaurants.
I know, but they had the best
from.
chili con queso. Anyway, so I love good food.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. Okay, very good. And is there a best kept secret spot in Houston, whether that's a restaurant or a park, or I mean, is there a place in Houston that's maybe a favorite place that you go that's sort of a best kept secret?
You know, I'm not sure it's somewhere I go, and it's probably not as big a secret after this weekend, but I encourage anyone that has a dog to go to the new dog park right there at Wall and Allen Parkway.
It was jam-packed this weekend.
My office overlooks that, so I've watched them develop that park over the last minute, and there were thousands of people, and they're still now, and just, it's gorgeous, and it's such a, and I don't own a dog, but I just think if you have a dog, that's a great place. It's really, and I think that whole Buffalo Bayou and everything we're doing is
amazing,
just great.
isn't it?
And Memorial Park, I love Memorial Park.
Yeah.
So I don't know if those are unknown, but those are two great
no, that's
places.
good. And when they make the Ann Murphy movie, who would play you in a movie?
Who would I? Oh, I don't know. Meryl Streep.
That's funny how every woman who can't come up with someone always says Meryl Streep.
Meryl Streep.
And why not? She's an
Yes.
actress who could play anyone, right? So
Yes.
it's very good. And thank you so much for
Thanks.
all
Boy,
that you
that went
do.
so fast.
And thanks for being here in the class.
Absolutely.
So very
Absolutely. Enjoyed it.
So we'll see you next time here at the Nonprofit Leadership Studio, and keep up the great work. Talk to you soon.